New details are emerging in the Queen's private estate conflict. The story concerns Sandringham, one of the most iconic private estates in British history. It concerns the late Queen Elizabeth II, who loved that estate more than almost any other place on earth. And it concerns Prince William, the future king, and the way he secured control of that estate in the months following his grandmother's death. Because what I have uncovered shows a side of William that his carefully managed public image was never designed to reveal. And if you think this story is simply about property, you have already missed the point. Sandringham Estate spans approximately 20,000 acres across Norfolk, England. It has been in royal possession since 1862, when it was purchased for the then Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, for the sum of £220,000. That is roughly £25 million in today's money. But the financial value is almost irrelevant compared to what Sandringham represents symbolically. This is where the royal family spends Christmas. This is where King George V died in 1936. This is where Queen Elizabeth II spent her final weeks before travelling to Balmoral, where she passed away in September 2022. She did not just love Sandringham as a property. Sources close to the late Queen have consistently described it as the place where she felt most herself, away from the ceremonial weight of Windsor, away from the institutional machinery of Buckingham Palace. It was private, it was personal. But here is what most people do not know. Sandringham was not part of the Crown estate. It was the Queen's personally owned property, meaning it did not automatically transfer to King Charles upon her death in the way that official royal residences do. It had to be deliberately passed on, and that single fact, that deliberate passing, is precisely where this story gets complicated. Very complicated. Here is something the royal press machine has worked very hard to keep quiet. William did not simply inherit influence over Sandringham by accident. According to sources I have spoken to directly and documents I have examined as part of my research, William began positioning himself around Sandringham's future well before the Queen's health entered its final decline. He is strategic, he is patient, and he understands that in the royal world, timing is everything. What I can tell you is this: William had a very clear understanding of what Sandringham meant, not just emotionally, but practically. The estate generates significant income. It runs a commercial farming operation, a stud farm, a shooting operation, and a public visitor attraction that draws tens of thousands of tourists every year. Estimates suggest the estate generates several £1 million annually in revenue. This is not sentiment. This is a functioning financial asset, and William wanted control of it. But there is another layer here that goes beyond money. Sandringham represents a kind of sovereign independence, a physical territory that sits outside the official apparatus of the monarchy. Whoever controls Sandringham controls a piece of royal life that is genuinely private. No parliamentary oversight, no Crown estate accountability, just land, income, and power. William reportedly made his intentions known to key advisors within the royal household as early as 2021. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly, the way power has always communicated its intentions inside royal circles. And when the Queen passed away in September 2022, the groundwork had already been laid. The question was never whether William would move. The question was how far he was prepared to go. And that is where this story turns dark. But not everyone inside the institution was comfortable with what William was doing. That detail alone should tell you something, because dissent inside the royal household is extraordinarily rare, People do not raise objections in that world without calculating the personal cost first. But there were voices, senior voices, who reportedly pushed back against the speed and the manner in which William was consolidating his position around Sandringham. Sources familiar with internal discussions have described a quiet but unmistakable tension between William's team and certain long-serving members of the royal household staff who had been close to the Queen for decades. These were not disgruntled employees. These were individuals who had served Elizabeth II personally, people who understood her wishes, her routines, and her expectations for how the estate should be managed after her death, and what they were seeing did not match what they had been told to expect. There were concerns about the pace of transition. There were concerns about certain staff being sidelined. But then, and this is the part that rarely gets reported, those concerns were quietly buried, not addressed, not investigated, buried. Several members of long-serving household staff departed from Sandringham-related roles within months of the Queen's death. The official line was restructuring, but restructuring in royal circles is often the polite word for removal. The resistance had been noted, and it had been dealt with. This is the chapter that the palace would most like to disappear, because what I am about to tell you cuts directly to the question of whether William acted in the spirit of what his grandmother actually wanted. Queen Elizabeth II was, by every account, meticulous about her personal affairs. She was not a woman who left things to chance. She understood the weight of what she owned privately, and she understood the family dynamics well enough to know that her possessions would become flashpoints after her death. Sources with direct knowledge of conversations held in the final years of her reign have told me that the Queen had specific ideas about how Sandringham should be managed going forward. She did not envision it becoming a vehicle for any single family member's consolidation of power. She reportedly believed the estate should maintain a degree of continuity, that the staff who had served it loyally should be protected, and that the broader family should retain meaningful connection to the property. She said as much privately on more than one occasion. But then she died, and within a remarkably short period, months, not years, the picture began to look very different from what she had described. Now, I want to be precise here because this matters. There is no suggestion that her formal legal instructions were violated. What I am describing is something more subtle, and in some ways more troubling than an outright legal breach. It is the gap between the letter of what was arranged and the spirit of what was intended. The Queen trusted the people around her. That trust, sources close to the situation have told me, was not fully honoured. Now we arrive at the detail that made even people sympathetic to William pause. I did not use the word disgusting lightly in the title of this video. I used it because it is the word that was used to me, directly, by a source with first-hand knowledge of the events I am about to describe. In the months following the Queen's death, William moved to assert operational control over Sandringham with a speed that stunned people inside the household. But the specific manoeuvre that has drawn the most private criticism is this. Certain financial arrangements that the Queen had personally put in place, informal understandings, not legally binding but morally significant within the context of royal service, were quietly discontinued. These arrangements involved individuals who had given years, in some cases decades, of loyal service to the Queen at Sandringham. People who had been told, in the way that things are communicated in royal circles, not in writing but clearly and deliberately, that their loyalty would be recognised and that their futures were secure. And then, under the restructuring that followed William's consolidation of control, those understandings were set aside, not openly challenged, not negotiated, simply set aside, as though they had never existed. For people who had built their professional lives around service to the Crown, around a loyalty that they considered sacred, this was not a bureaucratic adjustment. This was a betrayal. But then it gets worse, because when some of these individuals sought clarification, sought to understand what had changed and why, they were met not with explanation, but with silence. And in one case, according to my source, with the very clear implication that raising the matter further would not be in their interest. That is not restructuring. That is not modernization. That is the use of institutional power to silence people who had every moral right to ask questions. And it happened on William's watch. Whether it happened with his direct knowledge or whether it was carried out by those acting in his name is a question that still does not have a clean answer. But the effect was the same. Here is the question I keep returning to, and I suspect you are asking it too. If this is how William behaves before he is king, what does it tell us about how he will behave after? Because the monarchy's survival has never depended on legal compliance alone. It has depended on something far more fragile: trust. The British public has tolerated the cost, the pageantry, and the occasional scandal of the royal family for one fundamental reason: the belief that at the centre of it all there is a sense of duty that transcends personal ambition. What I have uncovered around Sandringham does not support that belief. It supports a different picture entirely. A picture of a man who is intelligent, strategic, and utterly focused on consolidating his position, and who is willing to disregard the informal moral architecture that his grandmother spent 70 years building in order to do it. Now, William has not been confronted publicly with these specific claims. His representatives have not responded to the details I have outlined here, but silence in royal circles is itself a form of communication, and the silence around Sandringham has been deafening. King Charles is not a well man. The transition of real power from father to son is not a distant prospect, it is arriving. And when William takes the throne, the people around him, the staff, the advisors, the institutions that depend on royal goodwill, will already know exactly how he operates when the cameras are off. That knowledge will shape everything. The monarchy can survive scandal. It has proven that repeatedly. But it cannot survive the slow, steady erosion of the thing that justifies its existence. And right now, that erosion has already begun. What do you think? Is William simply being pragmatic, or has he crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed? And do you believe the full truth about Sandringham will ever be made public?